Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Bryan. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
For the last 2 years, David Waldas has been my personal coach. We've spoken weekly without fail for over 100 consecutive weeks. He's been an essential guide on my journey in so many areas. It's been through my work with David that I stopped merely running a business, and instead he's helped me to build a movement with a big mission, which is to inspire 10 million men to walk the path of inner work over the next 10 years. He's also helped me to understand how to build a life where I can pursue massively important work and also experience joy in the journey. And by the way, that's a pretty big revelation for me and for most men as well. So today, Bryan and I shine a light on David's work so that you can learn how to build a powerful life through aligned living. So who is David Waldas? David is an executive coach who does two types of work. He provides leadership training for visionaries and visionary training for leaders. And you'll hear about the distinction in our conversation today. He's also the author of Insight, Influence, and Flow, which is a guidebook for high-performing leaders, and he runs a business called Aligned Living. In this episode, we're going to talk about why it's misguided to want to, quote, go back to normal after COVID, and how you can architect an elevated new future instead. David talks about why he believes so many men experienced the dip, like the motivation dip during weeks 4 and 5 of the quarantine, how this concept of taking the next right action will make everything in your life easier and more impactful. And I'm raising my hand here because that's a concept David taught me that has revolutionized the way that I built my life. He also talks about why most people are externally referenced, meaning 90% of your focus is external and only 10% of your attention is calibrated internally, and why leaders need to learn how to flip that dynamic to be truly powerful and grounded visionaries. Again, another piece of work that he did with me. Today is also the first time that Bryan and David, who've heard about each other nonstop from me over the last 2 years, have finally gotten to meet one another. And Bryan gets a taste of coaching from David at the end of the episode. Please enjoy this interview with my coach, David Waldas. Kind of a special moment here. This is the first time that David, my coach of the last 2 years, has finally had a chance to meet my boy, Bryan. This is like a big moment for me. So say hello to each other, fellas.
Hey, Bryan, how are you?
David, so great to meet you. I feel like I had this image. I've never seen a photo of you before. And I had this image of super guru based on the stories that I've heard and the intuitions that you've shared. So I'm very excited to be here and with you both.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like I already know you. We're in the same circles, but once removed. So it's your name's always coming up as well. So it's really a pleasure to meet you.
I'm afraid energetically you know me better than I know me. That may be true already. So we'll leave that there for now.
Yeah, you know what's really cool about the working relationship, David, that you and I have had over the last 2 years, and you've seen me go through a lot of stuff. Most of my life, I was kind of really oriented around productivity, performance, dragon slaying, goal crushing, optimizing my performance, pushing through every obstacle. And then when I came to our work together, your guidance and your leadership is quite different. Really, it's about making life aligned. That's aligned living is the work that you teach and that you promote. And in the past 2 years worth of our work, I found that I've been able to achieve bigger things that I've been able to dream of. And it's been enjoyable. What a fucking concept. It's
supposed to be mutually exclusive events, right?
Yeah, right. I'm supposed to either be killing myself and crushing goals or enjoying myself and fucking off somewhere. But I had no idea that I could actually enjoy myself while taking on some of the biggest things of my life. And that's been, I think a lot of the roots of that have been in the foundation of the work that you and I have shared. I wanted to make sure that you heard that from me, that our listeners have heard that from me. And you guys who are listening right now are going to benefit from some real genius that David's bringing to the show. So David, thank you. And why don't you just share a little bit about like who it is that you work with and what you stand for?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And there's something so important about being able to enjoy what we're doing, right? That it's not about delayed gratification, creating it for another day. It's been so fun to be part of that transformation with you. So yeah, I think aligned living really, I talk about it as visionary training for leaders and leadership training for visionaries. It's really about being able to ground within ourselves and also to be able to access a state of consciousness. We're able to see great possibilities for ourselves, great possibilities for our future, and to really ground that into the now. I think so many people get caught up like that are visionaries that are so kind of etheric and disconnected, and they can never quite seem to create it in this world. And so I work with a lot of people that are empathic or highly sensitive, and that are, there's always just been a struggle for them of how do I show up really powerfully here and create what I know is possible. And then I also work with people that are these amazing leaders. And I think that's more, the camp that when we first started working together, like you have this ability to lead that's so grounded and so powerful. And with people that come to me from that perspective, helping them really see the possibilities and to open up an aspect of themselves and access to something inside them, where they can see these possibilities and live in a state of consciousness that they're able to take them and ground them into their world and create things that they hadn't even thought of originally, but that just match them in such powerful ways and bring their gifts to the planet.
I would say that is spot on. And, a couple of years ago when we first started working together, it was really about kind of how do I optimize my business?
Mm-hmm.
And then from that place, it was like, how do I create a fucking movement in this world?
Right.
And I remember like one of our key turning points was around Zion. And I think we'll tell that story at another day, but like for the new year turning 2018 to 2019, I went to Zion National Park and I was driving from Vegas to Zion and I was listening to Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. And she tells the story about when she and Barack were still in that courtship phase. And she was sleeping over his apartment and she woke up in the middle of the night one night and she saw Barack staring out the window deep in thought. And she was like, Barack, what are you thinking about right now? And he sheepishly like turned to her at 2 a.m. in the morning. And he's like, I was just thinking about global inequality of economics, something along those lines, like, poverty and global like inequality. And I was like, the stupid stuff that wakes me up at night is about like some like email sequence and automation that like went wrong. And I'm like, or the next workshop that I'm running. And of course, making ends meet, building money and like prosperous living right now makes sense. Of course, it made me think about how small I was thinking.
Right.
And I was able to bring that work to our relationship with you. And like you helped me to really kind of be able to hold that massive vision, which is now helping 10 million men wake up over this next 10-year period to get on this path of inner work. And to hold that big vision while staying very grounded in the present. And being very grounded in the present was something like launching the Great Man Mastermind. Like you can't get to 10 million men without a nucleus. And Bryan and I have this extraordinary nucleus of 20 powerful men who are automatically lighting up other guys right now. And that's like, I would say, a prime example of how our work together from a visionary perspective and a leadership perspective has married quite nicely.
Beautiful. That trip to Zion was such a catalyst of change and what's possible. I think it was a real turning point, awakening point for you of just that being able to access that visionary self in a whole new way. And those experiences you had there, which that feeling of, I'm not quite sure how to describe this, it feels in the magical realm. And when we start to access experiences like that, it's the idea of what's possible just starts to blow open in us. And then the challenge comes, how do I ground this in and bring it to the world? And that's where the work all marries together and becomes valuable.
Do we tell that story really quickly about Zion? Because
I kind of think we need to. We've opened the box enough that it's kind of hard.
I know. I'm curious.
Okay. Yeah, because this is like transcendent kind of work. Okay,
Yeah.
like transcendent. Like I've never trusted someone to guide me in this way before. So David, like one of the things that you have is this impeccable ability to see things beyond like the 3D realm. Like I rely upon David to kind of say like, here's an intuition or a vision that I have for the future. Like, what are you seeing? And he has like this ability to kind of pull something out of the intangible space. So there was this one day in December of 2018 where Zion, the word Zion just kept kind of popping up in my ecosystem, right? And it was at the same time, Bryan, that you and I were supposed to go to Los Angeles together for New Year's for the Mind Valley, like New Year's Eve thing. And I started feeling like, I don't want to go there. I'd already bought my ticket. I'd bought my plane flight. I'd paid for my Airbnb. I bought the ticket to the party. All of the arrangements were made. I didn't want to go. And the version of me that like had lived my whole life up until that point was like, well, no, you've already made the commitment. You're going. But then all of a sudden I started seeing like Zion pop up. And I was like, okay, what would David do in this situation? So I was like, okay, if I see Zion pop up 3 times in the next 24 hours, then I know I've got some like sort of signal, right? A signal from the universe. And I would have thought this stuff is like completely woo-woo just like 2 years ago. So I turn on the television one day and then boom, Zion Williamson, who's like at Duke University at the time, like the #1 basketball player, is like the first guy on the screen. I'm like, okay, there's one. And then later that night, there was like a news story about something that had happened in Zion National Park. I was like, boom, there's 2. And then the next day I went to lunch with my father and my godfather, who was there at lunch, who I hadn't seen in 5 years. And he brought up Zion Williamson over lunch, completing the trifecta. So I was like, okay, there's 3 times. I'm going to call David. And I'm like, David, this is probably nothing. I don't think we want to spend the entire call talking about our coaching call, talking about this, but I just had this thing happen with Zion. And David, why don't you tell our audience like what you told me and how that totally transformed what I did for New Year's.
I'm trying to remember, that was a year and a half ago. And so
I remember all the details, so I'll fill in the blanks for you.
Man, I remember the outline of it, but as far as the details of what I told you, I imagine it was something along the lines of, if you're questioning it, just ask for more verification. Ask for, okay, great. Zion's name's everywhere in the news right now. I remember you talking about that, of course, I'm going to keep hearing about him. He's kind of a hot news topic. And so if it's not feeling solid, you ask for one more piece of proof, ask for something else to come back to make it unmistakable so that you're not feeling like you're off on some dreamy woo-woo trip, trying to make meaning out of nothing. Ask for something concrete that's just going to make it unmistakable so that you can't miss it. Is that what I told you? I imagine that's what I would have told you.
Yeah, that was a part of it. And the other part of it was like when I said, we're only to spend 5 minutes on the call talking about this, you're like, nope, we're going to spend the entire call talking about this. And by the end of the call, I'd canceled all of my plans in Los Angeles. I'd booked my flights to Zion. And one of the things that happened, and Bryan, maybe you remember this part of the story, 3 days before I was leaving for Zion, Mordecai, one of the men in our men's group, and I were in Brooklyn. And I was just like, let's just play a game. Let's go into one of these consignment shops, like, when a vintage clothing store, and you get $20, I get $20. Whoever puts together the best outfit like wins, right? But we're in Brooklyn, New York. You can't buy an entire outfit in a consignment shop for $20. Everything costs more than that. So it was like the idea failed. We were about to walk outside, and Mordecai looks up at this like gaudy pair of boots that are like gold plated and like black with Velcro straps on them. They're obnoxious. And he's like, Dom, you need to buy those boots. And he's like, what size are you? I'm like, I'm a size 10. It was only one pair of boots on the wall. And I pick up the boots and I pull back the tongue and it's a size 10. And then the name of the boot is listed right underneath that. You know what the name of the boot was? Zion.
Sedona. No, okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. The name of the boot was Zion. And it was $20. Just like we played the game. So I was like, holy shit. Mordecai knew the story at this point. So I bought the boots. I wore them on my flight in Vegas. I got upgraded to first class. The person next to me was like, what the fuck are these boots? I wore them there. And what ended up happening in Zion over those like 4 or 5 days, because I went by myself, I spent the New Year's on my own. I did some deep meditations when I was out there. That was the time where I gave up playing small games in my business, in my life. It was like when I had that, Michelle Obama, the Barack Obama, like this big awakening of why am I thinking so small? And that was where the seeds of the 10 million men eventually ended up coming to me months and months later, but it was the catalyst of change. And those 5 days that I spent there were of the most nourishing up-leveling of my life that I never would have gotten if we went to the Mind Valley thing where I would have just gotten fucked up for a few nights, coming back feeling exhausted on January 1st. And it was because I followed the Zion signs that came to me and David kind of providing me that point and go.
My recollection, Dominic, of that story is you telling me 4 days or so before we were supposed to go, you're like, yeah, I'm not going. I'm going to Zion. And I said, why? Like, let me understand this. And you're like, well, I have this coach. His name's David. And he told me I saw Zion a lot and I should go. And I was like, that's interesting. Okay. Turns out that party was terrible. And I texted Dominic the next day And I said, great move going to Zion.
Yeah.
I believe my girlfriend and I broke up a month after a month after that. Partially what stemmed from that New Year's Eve. So whatever magic that David's attached to here, great advice. And the thing I like about that story, the part that I didn't know, David, was you saying great. Like, is this just this magic sort of thing that's out there and we're hearing a lot in the news? Like, ask for confirmation and believe that it's either there or not going to be there. Because that's something in my life where I'm like, well, where's the line between this just being coincidence and something I should actually follow, like canceling my trip and going to a different location for New Year's?
Yeah, I love that. And I think I see that so much in kind of the spiritual communities, right? Of like, oh, there's a message in this, there's a message in that. Like, you know, an ant crawled up on my hand and I got this, you know, like, yeah, well, you're sitting on an ant pile, you know, that's probably, maybe the message is like, look where you sit. Not like, it's not about, you know, it's not about the ant. It's about like, be aware of yourself and what you're doing.
My previous partner and I, we left her apartment to go to a restaurant and she found $1 on the ground. And she's like, oh my gosh, abundance and $1. And I'm like, is it? Like, maybe it's just $1. And she got so pissed at me. She's like, I think verbatim, she said, don't ruin my magic. And I'm like, maybe it's magic. Maybe you should look for $100 other dollars. I don't know.
Yeah.
I remember there were some arguments around like things were going wrong. And then like a few days later, it was like, I know what was going wrong. Mercury was in retrograde, right? It was like, Mercury was in retrograde. That's why we were arguing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay, I know there are like these forces. I respect the moon cycles. And like, I know there are all of these things that are out there, but sometimes like an argument is just an argument because you're being stubborn. You know what I mean? Or because I'm not listening. And can we actually have that conversation?
Yeah. Like maybe Mercury is in retrograde. That's fine. It probably does do things. And also we have a rudder that we can control. Like, let's do that. Why not?
Right.
I love it.
David, that's what you do so well, is kind of like, you can kind of bounce back and forth and just be like, no, this wasn't about Mercury. You're just being an asshole right now.
You got to ground it, right? If you're not grounded, if you're just out in the etheric, like, what good is it? It's funny. And you know, our human mind wants to make sense of it. I went to Mesa Verde years ago in Anasazi settlement in the Western Slope in Colorado. Basically, the people had disappeared at a certain point from there. And so there's, you know, different speculation about it. A lot of New Age people think that like ETs came and got them, or, you know, like whatever. I went on a tour and the Ranger was giving us a breakdown on theories around. He said, you know, it's really interesting when you look at the time periods lining up with the theories, it was what was going on during that current time period. People think that's what happened to the people. Like, so during the 80s, the HIV epidemic was really big. And so they're like, oh, you know, the disease wiped them out. Years ago, during, I think, the Dust Bowl, there was a food shortage. And so all the archaeologists or anthropologists were saying, oh, you know, I think that there was a food shortage and that's why they died. So we tend to apply things to whatever it is we're experiencing, and our human psyche wants to generate it again and make sense of it from that perspective. And so I think it's so interesting, you know, when we look at signs from the universe, there's a real temptation to do that as well about, you know, what do I want? I want abundance. So that $1 means abundance, you know. It could just easily be like, well, if it was abundance, maybe it would have been $100 bill. And the dollar bill was about thinking small. It was about, I'm not accusing her of that, but it's interesting, whatever it is that we're wanting it to be, we often fill that in. And, you know, I think we've seen that right now with what's going on with COVID-19 is a lot of people's theories are about what's going to suit them best or what's really going to match them, and how they're navigating through it is they're making sense of it and either connected with what they want it to turn into or what their biggest fears are. And so they're either have a positive aspect around it and it's like, oh, this is how it's working for me, or they have a more negative outlook on it and they're like, oh, this is how it's affecting me in the negative. So I think we just fill in from our human place what makes the most sense based on our personal lives rather than maybe the big picture, which is part of that visionary aspect that's so important of this as so well.
What a great case study right now, given that we're most of us are in quarantine of some sort, going through a worldwide pandemic. And I'm curious, David, if you could talk a little bit about that. Some terms that I've been hearing lately is, let's get through this, let's get back to normal. And I'm curious, just from where you're at, what are you seeing and what are you feeling in this space?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that's been a big challenge for people is, you know, what is it going to take to get things going again? And a lot of people are seeking that getting back to normal. And it's funny, I have a lot of clients who are big picture people that I've been working with, helping them ground in their leadership piece. And a lot of the big picture people, they're really in that place of, I want everybody to go through this transformation. They see this time as it's a wake-up call. It's a place for self-confrontation. And it's interesting when people have, if they're spending this time binging on Netflix or whatever, it's actually upset some of the people. They're like, people need to use this time to wake up. And the feeling I've gotten is there's no way to avoid what we're experiencing here. No matter how much we binge Netflix, no matter what our initial technique is or strategy is to navigate this, like this is a long enough haul that we're all going to be confronted with ourselves in this. I think that's one of the, when we look for purpose in what we're experiencing in this, and granted, it doesn't take away from all the horrors that are going on in the world and the tragedy of it, yet embedded in this is this opportunity that can't be avoided. So, like we can see it as an opportunity because it's what we're facing, of self-confrontation and getting clear with ourselves about how we've been holding ourselves back. What are the ways that we've been behaving that we don't want to continue anymore? How can we restructure ourselves internally and grow out of this? And to me, that's where a lot of my focus has been, is asking, what's in this for me? What do I need to learn in order to move forward?
Yeah, we were talking about this before we hit record around, some people are really trying to race back to normal, right? It's like, how do we get back to normal? How do we get back to normal? And I shared with you guys that like I'd written down a potential topic, what I was going to record an episode on was, normal wasn't so fantastic either, right? Like a lot of people's lives weren't so fantastic before COVID hit, but we forget about what we complained about back then. And we like look back on it and maybe romanticize what life was like back then, just kind of like a bad relationship. Like when you get out of a relationship, sometimes you forget how terrible it was, but you just remember the good parts, like the sex or, having somebody, and then you kind of like, oh, I wish we could go back there. And David, I know you have a perspective on this, right? It's like, instead of getting back to where we were, what are some of these other questions that we can be asking ourselves to create a newer normal, an elevated normal, a better version of life after this passes?
Absolutely. And I think that question is, what is this trying to teach me? What is it that I've been avoiding within myself? It's interesting. And I think as we step into this, everybody, like I said, had their own strategy. And, we talked about what we were going to talk about today. And I was just dropping into meditation a little bit. And I was seeing this experience as like you're cruising down the road and there's this big mud bog in front of you all of a sudden. And you're like, okay, I got to cross it. And people came up with their own strategies, that we talked about this dip, I think, that people are experiencing right now, or a lot of people are experiencing. For a lot of people that are leaders in this, their idea was momentum, like I'll just hit the gas and I'll go full speed into this mud bog and I'm going to trust that I'm going to make it across. But this mud bog that we're experiencing is so long that it doesn't matter. Like I was saying, there's going to be a time when our tires are going to stop spinning and we're going to be like, oh shit, okay, time to deal with what is. And so, that momentum piece is people that have tried that technique. And again, there's not a wrong technique. There's just, we try whatever matches us the most. And so the momentum's worn out. Some people stopped and put on their mud tires and shifted into low gear and started moving along and trying to crawl through it. And at a certain point, those tires start to spin. And some people just shut down and waited for somebody else to clear the road, and started binging on Netflix. And at a certain point, there's going to be an action that those people need to take. And so it's coming to that place of self-confrontation. And like anything that we inevitably have to experience, we can sit and wait for it to show up in our living room, or we can intentionally seek it out. We can go, okay, what is this that I need to see in myself? What is this opportunity providing for me as far as a reflection of the way I've been doing things, or how I've been seeing the world, or how I've treated other people, or whatever aspect of it that isn't working, I don't want to carry forward in my life. For me personally, it was really interesting. I began this by kind of stopping and dropping into meditation a lot more and just trying to slow things down to get my bearings and get a sense of what's happening in the world, where this is going purpose-wise. And one of the things that it happened through dream a lot. It happened through just random thoughts as I tried to let myself really kind of lose a little bit of my form. And that's one of the things I'll do sometimes if I'm trying to seek out something that I'm not seeing that's not obvious to me, is I realize that all of us, we have thought patterns and structures, programs we run. And when we run those programs, it makes us very blind to other aspects of ourselves. And so I would intentionally try to turn off those programs and just let myself kind of drift a little bit, which is, obviously it doesn't work when we're trying to create something specific. But when we aren't sure what we're doing, that drifting, letting myself move out of structure for a short amount of time, has been really helpful for me, because the thoughts just start to randomly come up. And I've always been, had this visionary state that I was really stuck in for a lot of my younger life. And it was always seeing the big picture. And when I would see the big picture, I could walk into a room and just kind of get a sense of each individual, each person. And quite often there was very little I was interested in engaging with because it just didn't feel like a match to me. Like I could feel into it and it didn't resonate with me. And that was one of the things I was really confronted with of like, do you need to resonate completely with everything? Or can you look at like every situation has some beautiful aspects to it? And if I can pop myself out of the big picture and really focus on the things that are beautiful in it, like that changes my whole experience. And that was a huge self-confrontation for me because I tend to isolate a lot. I tend to not engage because it doesn't resonate because I was stuck in the big picture. And so it was a real beautiful awakening for me. And we all have our version of that, like that we can seek out intentionally. And it's allowed things to move forward much more powerfully for me. Like I think whenever we're stuck somewhere, things don't move forward until we kind of unlock what it is that we're stuck for. You know, clients started resurfacing as soon as I was getting the message and things started picking up for me.
So the question that you're asking for yourself and then bringing this to your clients is like, what is there to learn? What was the phrase that you gave yourself, the question that you asked?
What is this trying to teach me?
Yeah, what is this trying to teach me? And I really love that because you gave the analogy of trying to get through the mud bog of like, do I go faster or do I put on the mud, slow down and put on the mud tires or, you know, different strategies. And Dominic, I think you put out a podcast maybe this past week called The Dip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel like no matter what strategy we came up with that we thought was going to work in the beginning to like get through this, all of a sudden, no matter what that is, boom, we're in the dip. And that question that you posed there, David, of what is this trying to teach me? That's a beautiful question to be asking when we're in the dip.
Yes.
When like the mud tires aren't working, the speed's not working, this is not working. Like, oh, okay, like what is this trying to teach me? And it's unavoidable. And Dominic and I talk about that a lot. Like we can ask ourselves and proactively ask ourselves those questions, or we can wait until we get whacked in the face or hit by a Mack truck to the point where we have to. And now we've gotten to a point in the dip where we have to be asking ourselves, what is the next version of me, or what is this trying to teach me?
You know, there's the concept that I introduced maybe last week or the week before called a board of directors for your emotions, right? So like being the chairman, sitting at this board of directors, this big mahogany table, and each chair that's around there is a board of directors. And these are your emotions. These are your feelings. And they all get a chair. Could be like endless amounts of chairs because how many emotions and feelings do you have? But think about anger or fear or exhaustion or bliss or joy, gratitude. There could also be like the feelings associated with the dip, right? And like this past week when I hit the dip, it was just kind of like the emotion was blah. Maybe that's not the emotion, but that's like the sound that it made. You know, the like the feeling was just kind of like, ugh, I had no energy. It was demotivating. And when I had the question of like, what are you trying to teach me? Like I assumed that feeling had a positive intention for existing. And, you know, what it taught me was, it was like a few things. You know, Dominic, you've been pushing it pretty hard for these past few weeks, and it's time for like a little bit of recovery. And also like I drained myself in certain ways that I think I'll save for another conversation, another episode. But like, Bryan, you know about this from my share on Monday night at the men's group meeting. And it was just like, oh, okay. Like I didn't take care of myself. I drained myself. So these next few days are really about how do I take care of myself, get some of the things done that are mission critical, but not to like go back into hyperactive A+ performing mode. And David, that's one of the things that you've taught me is my standard was always so high. Like I always had to be at an A+ level, but at A+ sometimes for me, and this was something that you helped me to see, was I would oscillate between going 120%.
Yeah.
Or then because like I couldn't sustain that, I would drop to 80%.
Yeah.
So 120% would be frenetic. I would like blow out my circuits. And then 80%, I'd be half engaged. I'd be lethargic. I would mail in efforts and I would bounce back and forth between the two. And you're like, you need to be at 100%. It's just like 100% is the only way that you can operate effectively over the long term. And that 100% for you starts to feel like easy in a certain sense. So even when I hit my dip, there was this pull from like old conditioning to go to the 120%.
Sure.
Drink twice as much coffee, reach out to 50 potential clients to do webinars for. And I actually
read 900 books, meditate for 1,000 minutes in a row. I got you.
Yes.
I know what you do.
Yes, and I used to fall in
I know you're 110%.
you do. And you know what, man? And I could have rationalized reasons for that. This week, like I remember in certain mornings for like 2 or 3 hours, there'd be very little that I'd do other than drink my coffee, walk around my apartment, answer a few emails, read some books that weren't necessarily like life-changing. And I felt fucking awesome after those 3 hours. And then later in the day, like some really powerful inspiration hit, and we're able to like secure a few webinars that I'm going to be paid for, like in that afternoon when it came, and it was just like, here was an idea. I called someone and it was done. I didn't have to like reach out to 50 people.
Next right action rather than.
Yeah. Talk about what's the next right action. That's a big concept too.
Yeah. I love that you brought this up. The idea I think about it of people say you need to rise to the occasion. And, we're always doing that where we're lifting ourselves up and, really trying to charge ahead, and then we crash and recover. And that whole piece, like it's exhausting. And when we start to stabilize at that 100%, we realize that it is sustainable, that we don't need to, let ourselves crash and then rise back up, which really affects our self-concept. It's like, man, I'm this amazing creator, but I'm also this mess. So that whole piece of what does it look like when I figure out where my 100% is, where I can really sustain it, and I'm not dipping and I'm not becoming frenetic. And that's really a lot of the spinning the wheels, where we start wasting our energy trying so hard to create something rather than waiting for that right opportunity, waiting for that next right action. And that's one of the things I talk a lot about is when we're in our alignment and we're in that grounded leader state and we're in that visionary state at the same time, there's this kind of cusp between those two that we settle into. And from that place, there's a real sense of a lot of the actions that we might have normally taken. We can feel and get a very clear sense that they're not going to do anything other than they used to make us feel better, because they would be like, I'm busy, I'm working hard, I'm giving it my all, but they weren't netting anything. And so when we settle into that internal grounded place and that visionary state at the same time, there's a sense of what's important and a sense of like, oh, okay, this is the next right action, and this is going to move the needle. This is going to create change. And there's a patience, because sometimes that next right action is just to chill out, just to go for a walk or to relax a little bit, because there isn't a very clear thing that I need to do right now that's going to create change. Otherwise, I'm just off on some frenetic chase that's burning up my energy, that's going to create a crash afterwards, and it's just going to make the process longer. It's interesting. I was just thinking of this analogy. I've been really enjoying having a NordiTrack bike, and in it, there's a lot of interval training. And so they do these high intensity interval training workouts. And it's funny because you can see the leaderboard on it. So you can see what people are doing. And in the intervals, the whole point of this workout is to go, like 110% crash, recovered, and then line up again. And it's the opposite of what I teach, but it's funny. There's people that'll just be in there running the class, right? They're not doing the intervals, and you can see their speed, and they end up winning the race if it were a race, because they come out first because they're not going, full speed, slow speed, full speed, slow speed. They're just pedaling along, watching everybody else do that. Like I'll watch them like click, click, click right up the list, and they end up coming in at the fastest time. It's not what that workout's about, but they come in first because they're just cruising along. And, it's a great analogy, I think.
I've been living a high intensity interval life. Cool. And that's why I'm feeling like super creation and then climb back up. And then, yeah. This concept of next right action feels really good. And Dominic and I have talked about this recently. I feel like I've been trying to take not the next right action, but all the right actions.
All at once.
And that leads me down a path of not doing anything. And feeling crappy about it, which is a horrible cycle to be in.
Sure.
And so this concept of the next right action, I really like it, because that I can take.
Yeah.
Like that I can do, and then I can do it again, and I can do it again, and I can do it again.
Yeah.
An example of that from what we've been doing, Bryan, was when the coronavirus era hit. Like the first thing that we did was we started going daily podcasts. You and I did this 5 steps to fortifying your inner foundation during times of turmoil. And that was a podcast that I was like, okay, the next right action is to turn that into a keynote speech. And then I was like, I turned that into a virtual keynote speech, a webinar. And I started giving it away for free, but I gave it to like the top businesses in the industry that are like crown jewels, that if I did well for them, then I would get a testimonial, and then everyone else would be like, well, if you did it for them, And so then I did it for those 3. I got great testimonials. And then the next right action was, well, I'm going to take that and now I'm going to sell it. And so I started selling it. And then I turned it into a 6-part webinar series. I'm like, well, I'm going to sell that. And so it just became like next right action, next right action, next right action. That was very iterative. And it was done at 100%. And it felt light the entire time. There was like no overhead really. And now it's kind of taken on a life of its own.
Wow. Dominic, we took different next right actions there. David, my next right action after recording that podcast with Dominic was going to the bathroom. So I think
it's important.
I think Dominic,
it's important to get in touch with what
yours was a better one.
Each of our own next right action is. It's not going to be the same for everybody, which is a key component. It's like that's why we need to be our own leaders, right? If you started you would have had bigger problems if you started moving into creation when you really needed to be going to the bathroom.
Yes. But Dominic, I like that. I like that as an example of just the next right step, because if you were thinking at that point, let me go sell this 6-week virtual webinar, let me go build that whole thing, that's where I start to get bogged down in the heaviness of like, holy shit, this is really big. Like, where do I start? And I gotta be honest, when I was running my business, I felt like that more often than not. And so your idea of like, well, let me just turn this concept into a small thing for free, but do it smartly. And then like, let's see where it goes, as opposed to like, this is where it needs to go. That feels very doable.
Listen, the only reason why I'm here doing that is because I failed so miserably the other way. I remember right when I left Prudential, so 4 years ago, when I left Prudential retirement to become an entrepreneur, I was convinced that the future of my work was going to be online, selling like online courses and online, scalable. And I went and I built this whole huge thing where I invested in like a website. I paid some designer. I bought this $2,000 how to build a webinar program online from Lewis Howes. And so I spent thousands upon thousands of dollars. And I went and I launched this thing, which was a free webinar, like a webinar that was going to be free to get people to listen to something that eventually they would pay. No one even signed up for the fucking webinar. It was a free webinar. You didn't even sign up for it, man. Like you, my friend.
Yeah.
I tried to build the kingdom, and I never made an offer. I never really I never started at the next right action. I was like, oh, I'm going to build this huge thing. And when that thing failed, I was destitute for 48 hours. That weekend, I was like, holy shit. I kind of had banked my whole future on that I was going to be online. And now this thing failed. And I was like, am I going to have to go back to the corporate space and go back with the tail between my legs? And so that was a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, that next right action is just following the energy. That's a big part of what David teaches. It's where do you get the energy? Does that feel exciting to you? Is it exhilarating? Is someone else getting lit up as you're talking about it? Is there something there? And when that happens, it's just kind of that's easy. Whereas that other thing that failed was really hard every step of the process, including no one buying anything from me.
It's interesting. It brings up two other questions I like to ask too, is why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Not the greater why am I doing this, but why am I taking this action? And sometimes our answer is because I feel really uncomfortable right now. So, that's not the next right action. But when we ask ourselves, why am I taking this action? Because it feels really clear. I feel energized about it. I feel charged. And so that why am I taking this action is a great way to get in touch with what is my next right action. And it helps you get clear on, am I chasing a false next right action just because I'm trying to avoid how I'm feeling? The other question with that is, how do I want to feel instead? And start getting in touch with what creates that feeling as well, which can help us drive us into our next right action.
What you're talking about here, I think kind of can chunk up to this whole thing that you stand for, which is really around aligned living. And maybe it could be helpful to just speak to some of the key tenets of what it means to live aligned, or aligned living.
Sure.
And then also, I think maybe it could be kind of cool to dive in with Bryan if you want to be a guinea pig around some of this stuff, because I certainly know, or David, you could certainly share some of the stories that we've worked on together, but I think it could be cool to do some real-time stuff with Bryan here.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things about aligned living is that it's about referencing internal rather than external. And, most of us on this planet are so aware of our surroundings that we are constantly triangulating our sense of self, triangulating what we're supposed to be doing based on the feedback from the world, based on what we're feeling from other people. It messes with our self-concept. It messes with our next right action. And when we're tapped in externally and referencing, what we're really tapping into is how everybody else around us is feeling, what their desires are. And most of us do that and we get uncomfortable in it. And so then we spend our whole life trying to solve the discomfort that creates by engaging in everybody else's desires and needs and reflections and all of that. And so aligned living is really about creating a sovereignty. It's about going, okay, yep, that's all going on there. I'm very aware of it. And so how relevant is that to me? And we go through a technique, which is quite simple, where we disengage our awareness from that external at the same level. Maybe we're 90% external and 10% internal. We basically reverse that. And so we shut down the external, open up our awareness internally, and now we're 90% internally aware and 10% externally aware. And that sounds kind of like hokey to say it that way, but the experience that we have, it literally just kind of happens that way.
That sounds so clear to me, David. I love that because most of my life, and I imagine some of the clients that you work with, it is that triangulation of what's this person going to think? Am I doing the right thing? Is this a should thing? Am I going to get graded on this? Like, what's the outcome going to be? I went down, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I went down an entire career path for 10 years because I was completely surrounded with like, well, what are other people going to think about me if I do this? So like that changing of 90-10, 90% internal, 10% external, that sounds like freedom. I love that.
That's the initial experience people have is like, oh my God, I feel so free, tapped into myself. And the other thing that happens is when we're referencing externally, it's so loud out there, right? The world's just screaming at us constantly. And so we don't hear what we want. If 10% of that voice, it's kind of like 10% of the volume is our own voice and our own connection with ourselves and what we want. And so when we flip that around and start referencing internally with an awareness on the external, it's amazing how much it drives a new direction for ourselves. And one of the things that happens right away is people's self-concepts clean up. I think most people vision of themselves, it's like we're at the mercy of our surroundings. And so if we grew up in a family where we weren't that appreciated, or if we grew up not quite fitting into society, there's so much that we've decided about ourselves that is true when we're referencing externally. When we flip it around and reference internally, all of a sudden our gifts start to show up because that's what we're being shown. And then we start to be able to leverage those gifts, show up in them. And then the parts where we struggle aren't as important because generally the world's reflecting back to us, maybe our greatest strengths, but also all the areas that we're falling short of other people's and situations' expectations. And it's often not about what we're capable of. It's about what people want from us. And maybe that's not really what we're supposed to be bringing. We've just surrounded ourselves in situations that aren't matches for us.
How do you break people from that have been doing that their entire lives when they're externally focused?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's what I love about all this. None of it's about willpower. It's about experience. And so when we have the concrete experience of changing our referencing to internal rather than external, something happens. And our experience of being, of our consciousness, of our awareness changes. And so it's not something we need to overcome. We just see ourselves differently. It's kind of like we moved from, I was living in this environment, now I'm living in this environment. And from this environment, like I see myself in a different way. And I see my experiences in a different way. And sure, I can always go back and change my referencing point, but it's a very concrete experience. It's not mental gymnastics. It's not a way of reframing. It's experiential. I'm happy to take you there.
That's happening, right? Is this editable, Dominic? Can we change this if we want to?
But, I'll hold the authority on that one. So if I'm enjoying it, yeah.
Okay. If I don't get the external approval that I desire in this moment, cool, got it.
Yeah, it's happening now. So have an experience, Bryan. Enjoy it.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, let's play with it then. And so I like to think of it in analogies. And so if we think about the way we experience the world that we have plugged in externally, and some of us have, a greater ability to read the energy of everything around us, the emotions of other people. And it's almost like extrasensory. In fact, for a lot of us, it is extrasensory. It goes beyond the five senses. And so when we plug in that extrasensory self and we're constantly reading our surroundings, it's a lot of stimulus. We tend to get overwhelmed. We tend to get pulled in the directions of other people. We're always meeting the needs of our surroundings, and we're always operating from a place of how do I alleviate the discomfort that I'm feeling? And so we're trying to adjust our surroundings all the time. And it really keeps us from really what we want for ourselves. So if we were to just visualize this, thinking of it as cameras and microphones that are tapped in all around you, and they're recording all of your surroundings. And then the speakers and the screens are actually inside you. And so you're recording out there, playing in here. And so you're saying that it feels like what's out there is actually in here, but that's not the case. It's just our experience of how we've been on the planet. And so what we're going to do is we're going to essentially take those cameras and microphones, and we're not going to give them away to everybody else. We're going to bring them home inside ourselves. We're going to record from here and play in here. And so it basically breaks that external referencing. And so with that said, let's make it experiential rather than just theoretical. So for your part, just go ahead and close your eyes and take some nice deep breaths. And I want you to just start to feel out into your surroundings and just start to see what you pick up on. Can you get a feel for other people? Can you get a feel for, just what's going on in your surroundings and the energy of it? And let that expand way out, just using your imagination to picture yourself scanning out into your surroundings. And so we're going to take that ability to sense all of that, and we're going to start to just lift it up. And we're going to see it visually lifting up in a visualization above you. And I want you to put your hands out with your palms open. And those palms are representing all those cameras and microphones, all the things you're recording around you. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to turn them off for a minute. This isn't our end game. This isn't where we're going to stay, but we just want to see what it feels like to turn off that part of us that reads everything from the energetic perspective. So in just a second, we're going to close our hands into a fist. We're going to bring them down to our lap, and we're just going to turn off that extrasensory self. Okay? So as you're ready, go ahead and close the hands into a fist, bring them down to your lap. And we're just going to allow ourselves to just be fully in the body, letting that extrasensory self turn off, basically just dropping into a little bubble. Beautiful. And so, Bryan, what do you notice as we shut down and drop into this space just from observing where you're at right now?
Feels quieter.
Yeah.
Calmer, much calmer.
Yeah.
Feels smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Feels darker.
This is really interesting. This is just kind of like an access point we're going through. It's what I call a consciousness lock, where we're basically just going from one atmosphere to another, the external atmosphere to the internal atmosphere. And so we're going here for a minute, and it's amazing how much the stimulus from the external world just shuts off. And so when we drop into this place, that quiet that sometimes we only experience from, being out in the woods or maybe out in a boat, out in the desert, just slows everything way down. And so we'll just kind of fast track through this for the sake of being expedient in it. But I want you to take your hands still closed in a fist, put one over your heart and one over your solar plexus, just below your ribs there in the center of the body. And in just a second, we're going to take those same imaginary cameras and microphones. And when we open up our hands internally, we're going to turn them on inside ourselves now instead of outside. Okay, so as you're ready, go ahead and open up the hands and visualize yourself opening up internally. And as you do, we're just going to create this channel of light inside you, this center channel that is this direct connection with Source or the universe, however you want to see it. You're going to allow that beautiful light to just flow through the top of the head, right down through the back of the brain, spinal column, through the neck. Letting it flow down each vertebrae as it flows through the heart, all the way through the lower back, base of the spine out, the base of the spine to the earth, then the legs at the bottom of the feet into the earth, way, way, way down deep into the earth. That divine reflection, that sacred earth, grounding into it, stabilizing in that place, that solid connection. As you stabilize in it, there we go. We're going to invite that light from the earth now to flow back up through the feet, through the spine, flowing up each vertebrae as it flows through the heart, back of the neck, back of the brain, spinal column, out the crown. Just allow your awareness to slide from that front of the brain to the back of the brain. And just observing how it feels to be here. So what do you notice as we open up internally?
Feels brighter now.
Yeah.
I feel more creative.
Interesting. You notice how the quiet still sticks around?
Quiet's still there, but it's more of a vastness than before.
Yeah.
It feels bigger.
Absolutely. So this is the visionary aspect of aligned living that I was talking about, that as we ground it into our world, we're able to take that visionary, that creative self, that ability to see beyond the experience, to not get distracted by what we perceived as wrong in the past, but really tap in with that next right action, tap in with how we want to feel, what we want to create. This is kind of the edge of that. This is the beginning of what it feels like to get inside yourself, get in touch with your own gifts, get in touch with your own sense of who you truly are outside of the opinions of your surroundings, which are really not opinions about you, but opinions about the people in your surroundings and the surroundings themselves. So when you create this sovereignty, breaking free from it, all of a sudden you're much more in charge of what you're creating, how you're creating it, what you want, and you're much more in touch with it as well. And from the sovereign place, there's a freedom that allows you to navigate through the world that's been elusive for most people. So another really interesting thing to look at, without leaving this state of consciousness or this location, if you want to see it that way, of being internal, and I want you to, without going into the story of what you've told yourself about it or how you've known it, I want you to bring up something for yourself that's been a little bit of a challenge, something that's maybe been a little bit frustrating throughout this week, and just see how it feels from here without going into it, but basically inviting that challenge into this inner world. And so is there something you feel comfortable sharing that we can look at?
Yeah, I'm working on a new project,
Okay.
and I sometimes feel a block of fear that somebody else is going to be doing this. This is too big. Like, what are you doing? Why are you going down this path?
Right.
But mostly, like, it's too big. It's like you're being stupid.
Okay. Great. And so as we just feel that alignment, really getting in touch with that connection of that flow of energy that's flowing through the back of the head and brain, spinal column, flowing up from the earth. There you go. Just relaxing into that, being the back of the brain rather than the front. The front's where our prefrontal lobe is, where we go into problem solving. And we can really move into a flow state in the back. It just allows us to disengage from the problem. And so as we invite that feeling or invite that experience around the project, and how does the project feel from this internal state?
Exciting. I feel a smile on my face.
Yeah. How about that old feeling of like this is too big, or the obstacles or all that? Do they feel present, or what do you notice?
I wasn't picking up on those at all.
They're not really relevant from here, right? Because you're seeking solution rather than engaging in problem. And when we're tapped into the external world, our whole experience is about solving the problems. When we tap into our internal world, it's seeking the solutions. And you know, those are two very different things, and the actions that they create may not even be connected in any way. You know, I was trying to explain this concept to a client of mine who's a chiropractor, and he's like, "I think I get it. Can you explain it more?" I said, "Well, think about this. If somebody comes into your office and their hip is bothering them, do you work on their hip or do you work on their spine?" He's like, "Well, I work on their spine because their hip's sore because their spine's out of alignment." I'm like, "Exactly." And so we're not trying to solve our problems by working on our hips. We're aligning our spine, and that fixes a symptom of the hip.
This area feels a lot faster too.
Yeah. A lot less to deal with, much fewer variables. Yeah. Because we're not engaged in all the stuff that's not relevant. Because most of our surroundings aren't really relevant to what we're creating, not really relevant to how we want to engage with them. There's so many distractions, and when we're reading them constantly, it's more information than we can handle. And so what do we do with it? We naturally pick out the biggest threats or the biggest possibilities in it, and they rise to the top, and then we get so engaged in what can go wrong and the overwhelm. And from here, it's just about what's the path forward? Like, what do I need to know about? I need to know about the next right action. I need to know about what feels right. And a new guidance system shows up that's not bogged down by all the challenges of our surroundings, because those never stop. You know, it's like trying to bail the ocean with a 5-gallon bucket. Like, it's as soon as you move one out of the way, another one takes its place.
There's a knowing of like what matters from this place.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, like that's the thing that matters. Yeah.
And so, you know, this is just the tip of it, right? Like, we're just stepping into that state. And so we work with it to lock it in and to learn to live They call it aligned living because we live in alignment. It's not aligned moments. We're not rising to the occasion, but we're finding our 100% inside that space and operating from there. And it's amazing how much it cleans up our relationships. It cleans up our work environment. It cleans up what we create. We're not so bogged down with perceived problems. It changes our upper limiting because we're not so in touch with what could go wrong and the fears. It's an instant accelerator.
Bryan, how you feeling, buddy?
I feel like direction is clear.
Good.
What that next step is much clearer without, David, to your point, worrying about all the other interference that's like telling me like, this is dumb or too hard or too big or too whatever. It's like, oh, maybe that's true, but like I can still do this next thing.
Yeah. I think an easy way to look at it too is the volume is turned down on the what's wrong and it's turned up on the next right action. And so, sure, that could be playing really subtly in the background, but it's like, that's not that important. It's just, like a really quiet thing. And before, like what we wanted for ourselves was quiet, and all that we were bombarded with a very loud experience of like problems.
This is like rehab for me. I spent 13 years in corporate consulting. And you said, Bryan, what's the one most important topic that you talk about in consulting? It's provide value and prove it. Like, that's it. Like, what value. And so I feel like I've had to be so attuned to that external of what they're going to find valuable. And sometimes that's not creating the valuable thing they actually need.
It's not creating the solution.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Right. It's actually creating the thing that they're going to think is good and think is valuable versus like, actually, based on what my knowledge is, this is the next right action.
Yeah. And how nice too, because all of a sudden it's like there's a whole cleanup of stuff. It's funny. I used to be a school teacher, and it's funny. Inevitably, at the end of the semester, there'd be all kinds of stuff that'd be handed in. I'd be grading stuff, and I'd get to a point, and I'm like, I think I'm going to move to check plus, and check minus. So I'm like I don't need to, like, doesn't matter if it's a or a B, if there's a paragraph of feedback, like there's just so much here. I'm like, okay, check,
That's why my teachers did that. I never understood the check plus, check minus. Now I get it.
Yeah, and we can do that with our, there's all this stuff that comes out of, like, what is it that really needs our feedback? So, like, okay, sure, there's all these things that people have handed in that I need to take care of, but maybe there's like an essay that's really where the meat of it's going to be. And if I give all my energy to that and don't spend a bunch of time on things that are not as relevant, that we're going to be way more effective. Yeah, giving up on my lazy teaching tactics there.
Well, Bryan, buddy, I'm glad you got a chance to experience what I've got later this afternoon. I got a 90-minute sesh with David. It's kind of like our Friday afternoon. I like to cap my week with a session with David. David, brother, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for this.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah.
And let us know, like, who's the person that, like, you're most fired up to work with these days? Like, who are the people, if they're out there and they want to do work with you, who are you fired up to work with these days?
I appreciate that question. It's funny because I've always felt kind of futuristic with this. And a lot of people, when I try to bring it to them, in order to do this visionary work, we need to be able to let go of our grounded into the way we see things right now. And this experience with COVID-19 is doing that. Like, it's disrupting that piece where, people that are stuck try to take a new concept, pull into how they experience the world, discard the stuff that doesn't fit, and then, just try to grow it in their existing paradigm. And this requires a whole new paradigm. And so what I found is the people that really benefit the most from this are people that have gotten to a point where they say, you know what, the way things are, I'm not okay with anymore. And I'm willing to let go of what I'm experiencing right now to experiencing new possibilities. And people that are still really attached to the old, like I'm trying to grow from how I've known things, and I want to pull that and add to it. This is a little bit too fast of a move for. And so if you're at a place where you're like, what I've been doing, I can see why it's not working, and I'm ready to let go of that to adopt a new visionary paradigm that I can ground into reality and create from this place, those are the people, whether they're starting from a more visionary state or starting from a more leadership-based state, we all meet in the same place and ground that aspect of visionary leader into our world and move forward with it.
That's awesome, man. How do they get in touch with you?
Probably going to my webpage is easiest at davidwaldas.com. There's a place there where you can click on book a call with David, and they'll ask you a couple questions, and then we can hop on a call and see what resonates.
And they can always pick up your book, Insight, Influence, and Flow. Can they pick that up on the Amazons?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get on Amazon. There's a link on my website as well to it. And so, yeah, absolutely. If you just go on Amazon, look at my name or the name of the book, Insight, Influence, and Flow, you'll find it.
Beautiful. Obviously, all that stuff is going to be linked in the show notes. So great, man. Finally having you on the show. Bryan, I'm so glad you finally had a chance to meet David, and you meet Bryan. This was fun.
The David Waldas. This is amazing. Yeah.
It's so fun to meet you, Bryan, too. I know. I feel like
You too.
we have a connection now.
Yes.
All right, fellas.
Beautiful.